Hi, I'm Dr. Hackey Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains. And today I'm excited to welcome to our show here Tara Luhrmann. Tara is a writer, an author, a journalist, and a Tourette's self-advocate. Welcome, Tara.
Thanks, Hackey. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Could you introduce yourself a bit more properly than I did?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Tara Luhrmann. I'm a neurodivergent writer and journalist based in DC. So right now I'm the deputy editor of content at a media and information services company called GovExec. So I have the pleasure of working with really interesting clients, telling their stories in compelling ways. So it's everything from podcast production, video scripting, interviewing, kind of like you're doing with me right now. And no 2 days are the same, which is great for me because I'm really someone who gets a bit restless and gets bored pretty easily. So I love kind of getting to talk to different people and doing different things. There's this big movement around neurodiversity at work right now, and I've only started to come to terms with my own neurodiversity fairly recently. I have a tic disorder called Tourette's, and I was diagnosed when I was in third grade, but really for a long time kept it to myself and to my close friends and family. But the older I got, the more I realized this is a big part of who I am, and there's good things about it, there's bad things about it, but really being authentic and talking about it and sharing my story and kind of getting behind some of the stigmas around it is kind of what I'm trying to do now.
So for those of us who don't know or have the wrong idea of what Tourette's syndrome is, why don't you explain it to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Tourette's is a neurological condition. It causes people to have tics, so sudden twitches, movements, or sounds that people do repeatedly. My condition of Tourette's is different than someone else's condition. Some are more intense. Some are a little bit more mild. We can, what people who have Tourette's generally can hide them, but when I'm hiding my tics, it's not comfortable. It's like takes a lot of social anxiety. And so I guess I think one of the biggest misconceptions around Tourette's is that it's swearing. It's and I think that's a term called coprolalia. And that's actually only 10% of the people who have Tourette's have coprolalia. I'm not one of them. There are people who have it, but I think that's kind of like the general
because that's how we see it portrayed. We see
media,
it portrayed in the media.
Exactly.
All the cursing and bad words and everything, but that's only 10% of those who have Tourette's. Tell us about growing up with your tics and figuring things out.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think a lot of people have kind of good memories of their childhood, and there were definitely some good memories, but I would say generally it was a really hard time in my life. Obviously I was in third grade. I was bullied in school for my tics quite a bit. I even once got kicked out of class from, for being loud in class or kind of misbehaving when really I was just, making sounds that I couldn't control. And so a lot of my teachers didn't really know how to deal with the situation. They weren't really trained on it. And because of those experiences, I had a lot of shame around it. And that's part of the reason I held it in for so long and I didn't tell people about it. But in high school and college, I got a little bit more comfortable. I told some of my close friends, but I was still pretty closed off about it. I think, just having those experiences and, I almost associated my Tourette's with this view of myself from the outside. People, I would always think like, oh, I'm different, and I'm people won't like me or people will judge me because of my tics. And the more I've opened up about it, the more I realize that's not the case at all. And everyone's really understanding. Not everyone, of course, there are people who aren't, but in general, my good friends, my colleagues, they've all been really understanding about it and open to talking about it and, asking how they could help me and stuff like that.
Have your tics changed over time?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I have one tic where I kind of go like that. That's probably like, that's kind of lasted throughout my entire life. But then I have other ones that, ebb and flow kind of, I'll have one where like a neck tick, that's kind of like the only kind of noise that I make. But yeah, I would say they kind of come and go. So it's interesting. Like, yeah. And then there are ones that I had when I was younger that I don't have anymore. I think sometimes their tics get less severe as they get older. And I would say in college, my tics were less severe. But now, they've come back. And I think also just me embracing them has made me a little bit more comfortable, just, not hiding it as much. So
Does stress play a role with pronouncing the tics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say when I'm tired, stressed, I definitely tic more. If I'm in like an uncomfortable situation, if I've held them in all day, if I've been in like a group setting and I, am not ticking as much, and then I come home and I'm by myself and I take a little bit more. So there's a lot of different factors that play a role for sure.
For some of our viewers out there who might have Tourette's and be having trouble at work, tell us about the workplace and how you navigate the workplace.
Yeah. So I would say it's interesting. It's I'm still working remote because of COVID. And one thing I noticed is like being on Zoom and ticking is interesting because if you're not on mute, I'll do one of my tics and it'll think I'm talking, and it's this kind of weird thing. So it's almost more noticeable because I'm remote. And so I actually did have a conversation with my boss around it. She was super supportive. And, this was not when I started. It was kind of further along. It was kind of like, I was like, I know she knows that there's something and I'm not talking about it and she's not going to ask me about it. So I really need to, be open about it. And so I talked to her about it. She was actually really understanding. She even told me about, she has ADHD and, it's not something that I don't know if she would have told me if I didn't kind of open up to her first. And then, I'm also on a diversity, equity, and inclusion council at my own company. And so obviously we talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about socioeconomic status, all these things. But, neurodiversity is something that I think sometimes is forgotten. And even within the neurodiversity conversation, Tourette's is like, kind of, people don't think about it. They think of, okay, autism, ADHD. So I think it's kind of like raising awareness around that and talking about, neurodiversity and disability inclusion, all that stuff. So
yeah, it's funny how in the universe of neurodiversity, like Tourette's has become kind of a stepchild,
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, and it's like when you mention it, it's people are like, oh yeah, of course that's part of neurodiversity. But yeah, it's definitely a kind of, I don't know, not to say there are levels of it, but it's definitely forgotten about sometimes. Yeah. So it's
tell us about your work and how you got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think because of, not because of my Tourette's, but certainly it was an aspect of it as a kid. I was bullied a lot. Like I said, I didn't really do super well in school. I worked really hard and I there were certain things that, I needed extra time on tests and stuff like that. But one thing I was always really good at was writing. And I always wanted to get into journalism. I studied English when I went to college. And really, my first job out of college was working with at a firm that kind of did government services. And I really liked the idea of just working with government leaders and, telling their stories and really the mission behind it. And so what I do now is a little bit more creative, but it's still kind of working with that, that industry, which I enjoy. So
from your perspective, what role do you think journalism can play in, bringing society more to its senses about its approach to neurodiversity?
Yeah, so I think, there's obviously this huge movement in the workforce specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think just, telling the stories of the neurodiverse community, there's so many people who fall under that umbrella. And, I think a lot of us, myself included for a while, just haven't been willing to admit that. But, the more we make it more, mainstream and more really we talk about it more, the better I think, people are going to really make changes in the workplace and make changes in society. And I think, journalists, just the way they tell our stories, not stigmatizing us, not, getting the facts right about Tourette's and about, other kind of misconceptions around different disabilities as well.
What kind of specialist do you go to when you discover you have Tourette's?
Yeah, so I went to, when I was younger, I saw a psychologist, and I saw a psychiatrist as well. There's also people who go to a neurologist. I actually go to a neurologist, but not for my Tourette's. I have migraines as well, and that's kind of anxiety induced. So there's a lot of comorbidities around. I also had OCD as a kid. Pretty severe. It's, I still have it, but it's a little bit less severe now. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of different ways to go about it, but I would say neurologists and psychiatrists are kind of the two main ones.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we started differentbrains.org, is because none of these entities occur in isolation. There's always overlap and comorbidities.
Totally.
It's not isolated.
Yeah, for sure.
What is one thing you wished everyone knew about Tourette's syndrome and other tic disorders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I wish people knew that, not everyone with Tourette's is what you see in the media, what you see kind of on TV. I think there's a lot of jokes around it. But, to those of us who have it, it can be funny when we're making fun of ourselves, but it's not, it's not something to laugh at. And it is a serious condition. Some people have kind of different tics, more severe tics. Some people have less severe tics. There's no one size fits all. So, you might have a friend with Tourette's, but that's, you might meet another person who doesn't have Tourette's. So, really just knowing that it's a complex disorder, but also, it can give people who have it really interesting kind of attributes as well. I would say I'm more creative because of it. I have more empathy because of it. So, for as many frustrations as there are, there's also kind of little, really good things about it too.
How do people find out more about your work?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's just taralerman.com. So my name and then added.com. That's where I put a lot of my work, and then as well as my my writing around Tourette's and some of the other stuff that I'm doing. So that's where you can find all my stuff.
Well, that's a good website when it has your name.
Yes.
Great.
It's the good thing about having a not so common name.
Is there anything we have not covered today that you'd like to cover?
I don't think so. I think I would just say, to people who see someone who's moving a little bit differently or maybe has kind of a tic or a twitch, just, giving them grace, not staring. I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that I deal with. It's not necessarily the Tourette's itself, although that can be frustrating. It's really the, the way that people look at me when I am ticking in public and stuff like that. And so I think just, going about your day with a bit more empathy and really understanding that, we're all dealing with something, and what that is, might not be entirely clear, but just kind of being a little bit less judgmental.
All right. Well, Tara Lerman, thank you so much for being with us today, teaching us all about Tourette's, coming to us all the way from Washington, D.C. And we hope you won't be a stranger here at Different Brains, and we can have you back.
Of course. Thanks so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Exploring Different Brains is a production of Different Brains. Visit us at differentbrains.org.